Welcome to video 4 of the 5 video series. In this video we're going to examine the special circumstances managing time has on projects. So let's get started. The definition of a project included the constraint of time, and often with a project there's this idea that the project will at some point finish. When setting something up, this temporary organisational structure to do a piece of work, and then once that piece of work's done it will then be disbanded, and that whole structure is an overhead to the organisation in which that project is run. So it's important to understand this time limited nature of projects. We started in the last video introducing this idea of the analogy of an egg and using the yolk, white and shell to reflect the 7 factors that every project manager has to deal on every project every day they work. But it's also a useful analogy that this egg also represents a seed, an embryo, the start of a life. And in this sense, it's the start of a project's life cycle. So in nature, the life cycle would be you're born, you grow and develop, you mature, and then eventually, sadly, you die. And the same can be said of a generic project. You start it, you plan it, you do it, and then you close it down at the end when everything's being delivered. Whilst we're on the topic of life cycles, it's also worth highlighting that the bringing together a group of people to form this temporary organisation to actually deliver the project, there's also a team building life cycle of forming, storming, norming, performing and mourning, and that reflects the uncertainty of people first coming together, establishing ground rules and to the point where they're actually productive, and then they work together, and at the end of the project when they have to disband there's this sort of mourning period. So that's a team building life cycle, which is sometimes useful to remember as a project manager. And it's also worth highlighting that apart from the generic project life cycle that I suggested of start it, plan it, do it, close it, the project management body of knowledge has developed a number of different organisations around the world where they've adapted that sort of best practice, that toolkit, and developed slightly more specific methods for running a project. One of the examples on the screen relates to Prince2. Prince is an acronym for projects running in controlled environments, and Prince1 was really focused around IT projects, so it was very centric around that, whereas Prince2 came out in the mid-late 1990s and aimed to be a project method for any business project. And as you can see from the screen, the different elements of that do tie up with this start it, plan it, do it, close it. It just goes into a little bit more detail for the training for that. Prince2 isn't the only project management methodology out there, but it just shows an example of how what I'm covering today does relate to other commercially available methods that you may end up using on projects as you come to be a practitioner of projects going forward. So now that we've defined this generic project life cycle, it's about time we sort of tried to bring things together and relate this to the management functions that we discussed earlier, and Henri Fayol's 5 functions of management. As you can see, the plan and organise activities are sort of closely linked with the start it and plan it phases of a project. The control and execute functions of management closely linked to the do it and close it functions, and the lead function of management encompasses the whole project, this idea of directing everything that's going on. This can also be illustrated by thinking about, because a project's delivered over time, at some point you need, as part of the planning, to come up with some time frame for the project, some schedule, some plan that says you do this before this, and then you've got to do that, and at some point in the future there's other milestone going on. And I like to think of that as 2 different layers. You've got a management layer and an execution layer. And again, this links to Fayol's 5 functions, in that you've got execute is one of the functions actually doing the work, but the rest of it is really around making sure that people know what has to be done, the right resources are in place, the quality controls of measuring that when something's done we know it's fit for purpose, and that is all with the constraints of time, cost and quality, and making sure that everybody's kept in the loop as to what's been going on. So I like to think of most of project management is working on the project, so it's working in this management layer, whereas the day-to-day doing work is really executing the project, which is the execution layer, and making the distinction between working on the project and working in the project is very important. Another thing worth highlighting is that the management layer links to this generic project lifecycle, whereas the execution layer, the actual doing work, there may be other life cycles that are relevant to the different disciplines that you might have to combine on a project. For example, if it was an IT project might have a life cycle of its own where you have to analyze requirements, design the solution, build that solution, test that solution, and then hand that over to the business to then use. Or if you're in a property type project, there may be obviously the design stage, then you build the foundations before you can put the walls and roof up. You've got to make the place watertight. Then within the building you've got wet trades, dry trades, first fix, second fix, and finishes, and then final building inspection before it can be handed over to the paying customer. One final thing worth noting in terms of the distinction between the management layer and the execution layer is that as a project manager, if you find yourself spending a high proportion of your time on execution layer type activities, you probably haven't got enough focus on the management of the project. As I say, we've highlighted this idea that there's projects and there's management, and project management brings these two together. And it's very important that, as I say, you spend most of the time, if you're the project manager, working on the project and not in the project. So we've started to bring the separate elements of project and management together and emphasise the importance of focusing on the project. Let's now consider what happens in each of the different stages of the generic project lifecycle. The start it phase of the lifecycle takes the overall idea that a project's needed and puts some substance together so it can be commissioned. This includes defining what needs to be achieved and why it needs to be done. That's sort of the business case side of things. It establishes the governance for the projects and what constraints the project will be run under, and that includes appointing the project manager. And as a final sanity check, there's a decision made on whether to actually proceed to more detailed planning, and if so, it then moves into the planet stage. The planet stage can be considered in two separate stages. The majority of it is the actual iterative planning itself. It's defining what does the outcome look like, what resources do we need to get there, what needs to be done to get there, and how we measure success to know that we've actually got there. And throughout this process we're assessing and managing assumptions, issues and risks, and we're looking at the constraints of time, cost and quality, and particularly the quality in terms of what's fit for purpose, making sure we don't over-engineer something and make something too complicated we don't need to. The second step of the planet stage is baselining, and this is quite a short step, but it's critical to the project, and that's really where we've sort of said that we've gone through this iterative planning cycle and we need to formalise the plan once everyone's happy with it. Again, once we've done that, at the end of the baselining stage, we have this sanity check. We need to decide whether the business case still stacks up, the project's still viable, and it's worth proceeding from planning into doing and executing. The do it phase consists of three elements, and these are closely linked to Fayol's management cycle as well, because it's an iterative process where you've got this baseline plan and we're now executing against this agreed plan. We're delivering something. At key stages within that plan, there'll be opportunities to monitor and accept what's being delivered, what's being done, and ensuring that what's delivered is fit for purpose. As I say, throughout this process we're still looking at assumptions, issues and risks and managing those and any changes that come along, and we've still got time, cost and quality that's being juggled, and that's really where this other activity, control, takes place, which is the project manager monitoring all the activity that's going on against the plan, and if there's a slippage, taking corrective action. Once the project has delivered what it set out to, or there's changes within the project that suddenly mean that the original business case means that the project is no longer viable, the project can be closed down. And it's during the close it phase where all the loose ends are tidied up and celebrate success. So that's shown that we can break down the generic project lifecycle of start it, plan it, do it, close it into 7 slightly more detailed steps of commissioning, planning, baselining, delivery, acceptance, control and closure. We've also considered other life cycles such as the team building life cycle and the technical life cycles that happen within the execution layer of the project. And if you're the project manager, the importance of working on the project and not in the project. So that's that for this video. If you want to now go on to the final video of the 5 videos in this free series, you may also be interested in understanding a little bit more about the team building life cycle I referred to during this video. There's some information about that on this website. And also, although we went through the 7 steps of decomposing start it, plan it, do it, close it, there's actually an 8th step on one of the videos which links back to continual improvement, which may be of interest to you. So again, check those out on this site, and I'll see you on the next video.